All right, what's up, everyone? Episode 11 with Hoops with Noel. A lot in the NBA world has happened specifically today and just in recent times. But we can start first off with, I wouldn't say this is the biggest news, but this is pretty big around the league. And it's basically what's been happening in Dallas. So they lost to the Clippers in 7. And then Kristaps didn't have a good series, so he got kind of torn apart on social media and just by the media. And then a lot of other stuff with the front office has gone down. But we'll start with you, Noel. What are your thoughts on this whole rift between Luka and then just the Mavs front office?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's pretty concerning, especially with Rick Carlisle, with how many seasons he's been there, stepping down. And I think I look at it one of two ways, where if you're Luka Doncic, this team's basically revolves around you. And I would either think, if I'm him, that I want to take a bigger role in the front office and actually plan out players who I want to play with. Or if I'm Luka Doncic, I'm looking for other teams to maybe go to. I don't know how much of his contract is left. I'm sure you guys can speak on that. But I think it revolves around him. And if I'm him right now, I'm kind of concerned about the future of this franchise. So those are my initial thoughts. What about you guys?
Yeah, I had actually a slightly different reaction because Luka Doncic has already said, right, that he wants to sign the first big extension. You know, the one Jason Tatum signed, Jaylen Brown signed. He said he wants to sign that max extension right away. And I think people have said he's going to sign it. And then people said with Carlisle and Don Nelson, at least with Don Nelson, there was a report about how there was an analytics gambling guy that had taken over the front office. So Don Nelson was unhappy about that. But then Mark Cuban called that BS on Twitter. And then with Rick Carlisle, there was a report that him and Luka had a rift. And that's why he decided they mutually parted ways, but it seemed that Rick Carlisle stepped down rather than them firing Rick Carlisle. So I think both of those things are very interesting, because obviously if Luka Doncic and the coach aren't getting along, you're probably siding with Luka Doncic because the NBA is just a players' league. But I actually happen to think Rick Carlisle is an excellent coach. I know there were some questionable decisions that he's made since they won the title in 2011. I know Dallas hasn't gone very far since they've won the title in 2011. But if you look at Rick Carlisle's resume, you start off with what he did with my Pistons. He took them to their first Eastern Conference Finals in 2003 before the 5 straight. Larry Brown came in and won the championship the next year, but he was the first coach to take him there. Then he went to Indiana, won 61 games. Then he won one of the great rings, honestly, with Dallas, the teams that they went through, beating the defending champs Lakers, sweeping them, and beating the LeBron, D-Wade, Chris Bosh Heat. That was really impressive with Dirk Nowitzki. So I happen to think Rick Carlisle really is an excellent coach. And like, one of the things, Blake, you actually make this point to me all the time, and I think it's one of the best, most astute points I've ever heard when it comes to coaching changes. It's, well, yeah, you can fire a coach, right? Like in the NFL, you can fire a Ron Rivera if you're the Panthers, you know, a good, solid coach, but maybe you can do better. But who are you hiring to ensure that, you know, you're getting better? And that's my question with the Dallas Mavericks, right? I know Luka's going to be great. I know that they'll find a way to probably unload Kristaps and work things around and create some help for Luka, just because they will do that. Now, whether it will be the optimum amount of help, I don't think so. But can they do something to get it better around him? I believe that. But the biggest question to me is, how do you replace Rick Carlisle? Because I know he's a little bit hot and cold at this point. Some people think he's still really good, like me, who've watched basketball for very long time, and he was really good back then, and he slowed down a little bit, but some people don't think he's that good. I mean, Dallas had the greatest statistical offense in NBA history last year, and it was with Luka Doncic, Kristaps Porzingis, Tim Hardaway Jr., Dorian Finney-Smith. This wasn't, you know, the 17 Warriors with KD, Steph, and Clay. So he had to have been doing a couple of things right. So I think that's the big question. Like, okay, you replaced Rick Carlisle. You're probably going to bring in a coach that's very compatible with Luka Doncic, but is that coach going to make you better? Because getting rid of Carlisle means that you think you can get better, and I'm not sure how many coaches are better than him.
Interesting. Yeah, I think the first point you made with you mentioned the guy who's kind of been running the front office, and that's why Don Nelson was mad. His name's I don't know how to pronounce his first name. He goes by Bob though. So Bob Voulgaris, he's he's like a professional bettor. I believe he does poker.
Mm-hmm. He's a gambler.
Yeah, he's very analytically driven, and from what I've gathered, he's very influential in the decision making and transactions and rotations that have gone on with the Mavericks. And some people don't like that about him, and maybe they've said he's a little too arrogant and a little over his head. And I guess that's how you kind of have to be as a gambler, right? You have to trust your instincts, and maybe that's not the best thing you want in a front office. So that's kind of what I think the main reason has been calling with the issue with the Mavs. And then also Mark Cuban too. I don't know what's up with him, but I feel like a lot has changed in the last 10 years. If you guys remember, there was the hidden, I think it was sexual misconduct or assault that he didn't know that was going on in the organization that he later found out about. That's concerning. And now this, where a couple days, there was stuff in the media like, oh, there's issues with the Mavs front office. He said, no, that's total BS. Next day, your coach leaves and your GM's gone. So clearly he must not have known about that either. And that begs me the question, I think Mark Cuban's an awesome guy, obviously very successful businessman, but is he really that engaged with the team now? You see him on the sidelines and stuff, but if there's all this stuff in the front office that he doesn't know about or he's unaware of, that's very concerning because he's the guy at the top and a lot of the decisions go through him. So that's concerning to me. And then with the head coach, I think you just got to find a guy for Luka. Typically, NFL, I would say usually you don't cater to one person's needs because it's a really big team and you can't run a team or have an NFL team run by one player in most cases. But in basketball, it's all about the stars. I mean, you look at the teams now, it's not all about who has the best, 10-man rotation, who has the most complete team. It's about who has the superstars because those guys win games, and you're going to have to find someone for Luka. And I'm with you, Vish. I think Carlisle's a good coach. I don't think he'll have any trouble finding a job next year. I know he's talked about going to the Bucks, even though they're still in the playoffs, which would be an incredible fit, maybe even in Philly for him too, depending on what they do with Doc. But bottom line is you got to find someone that makes Luka happy because as of right now, he is your saving grace. He is the hope. He's the face of the franchise. And I'm going with the player instead of the coach if I'm an NBA team, especially someone as uber talented as Luka and as young as he is.
I have one question for both of you, and it's something that Blake touched on. And Noel, I want to hear your thoughts on this first. You touched on whether Cuban is aware or not. I want to ask that question. Do you think Cuban is unaware, or do you think he's playing it off as if the media doesn't know anything and he's well aware that, that this analytics guy is pissing off Don Nelson and this analytics guy is pissing off Rick Carlisle, but he just prefers Voulgaris, you said his name was? He just prefers Voulgaris to them.
We'll go by Bob. Bob's probably
Bob. And just another thing with Don Nelson, if you guys don't remember in 08-09 when Don Nelson, not Bob, when Don Nelson was coaching the Warriors, this was at the end of his coaching career, the last time he coached. He was one of the pioneers for the NBA going smaller. He kind of started that trend. Now, he doesn't really get credit for it because he didn't win a championship with it or anything, but he was one of the people who originally saw where the league was going. And I think that's I would argue that him and Carlisle are two of the more progressive people in the NBA because they've survived through this entire league change, right? Like Carlisle's been coaching since the early 2000s when it was slow-paced ISO basketball to this very fast, heavy three-point shooting movement league. And the fact that the Mavs have been able to adapt, I mean, Luka Doncic helps that a lot, to me shows how progressive they are organizationally. So I guess long story short, my question is, do you think Cuban is actually aware and he's playing it off that he's unaware? And two, do you think that the Mavs will remain one of these progressive organizations without Don Nelson and Rick Carlisle?
So I'll jump in first, and I think we just had a comment come in from the man Jamal, and I almost completely agree. I think Mark Cuban is a businessman first. I think he's fully aware. I think he's always trying to patch up. If there's a problem that emerges and the media gets a hold of it, he'll make it into something that seems a little bit less of a problem. But I think what Blake was saying that makes perfect sense is he's kind of got caught in doing that, where he said it's not a problem, but it is a problem. So I'm curious if he might change his approach. But I think right now and in the past, he's definitely been aware, and he's definitely playing it off that it's better than what it is.
I guess to respond to that, I would say he might be aware, but does he know the full extent of it? Because I don't think he would come out and say that's total BS if he knew that the GM and the head coach were thinking of resigning. Maybe he would have said, I'm aware of this, or I guess I don't know what he would say. Oh, it's a tough position to be in, honestly. But the thing that concerns me is it's not the first time it's happened. And that's where I'm a little concerned. Because if this was like a one-off thing, you'd say, okay, like it just happened once. But with what happened in the past, which is a very serious matter that he didn't know about, that is concerning to me. So I don't know. I guess Jamal brings up a good point with Shark Tank. Shark Tank is great, but I feel like he's pretty cut and dry on Shark Tank. He'll tell you if your idea sucks or not. So I don't know. I just don't know if maybe he's out of it or maybe he's not. But it's just concerning that this has happened a couple times. And he's been either completely unaware or he'll say something and the exact opposite is true. But what did you think, Vish?
I agree with Noel. I think he's BSing. Now, the sexual misconduct thing, I don't want to place any accusations. I have no clue about that. That was a really ugly situation. Mm-hmm. The fact that he was unaware, to me, brings some culpability because he is the CEO and leader of that organization. So I would hope that's something you're aware about. So to me, that was very disturbing. This one, I actually think that I don't know if he's unaware or I don't know if he's maybe looking to be more powerful maybe in their front office, because I'm assuming, given Don Nelson and Rick Carlisle's track records before they took over running Dallas, they both probably had the largest say and they had a very specific way they wanted to do things. And maybe with Cuban bringing in Bob and him really liking what Bob has to say, and because Cuban being a tech guy, I'm sure his mind thinks a little more logically and he thinks more critically. And Don Nelson and Rick Carlisle are probably basketball purists. I'm sure he can understand the breakdown of numbers and logical sense of if we play this guy X amount of minutes and this guy plays X amount of minutes, algorithmically it makes sense, right? So maybe he understands basketball a little better like that, and maybe they want to be a more analytical driven team. I have no clue. I'm just speculating off the cuff. But I think this is a little bizarre. I understand how old Don Nelson is. He's 81. I understand how old Rick Carlisle is. I think he's in his 60s. But to me, the way they both went out like this, especially when you have the Mavs who have Luka Doncic, right? Like you have Luka Doncic. Who would want to leave a team with Luka Doncic? It's bizarre.
Mm-hmm. And you go, Noel.
You got it, Blake. You got it.
I was just going to say one final thought if you want to go first, Noel.
Yeah, I was just going to say one thing I've been thinking about is regardless of who the new coach is, because they were such a fringe team to almost having everything they needed to make a run for the ship, that I think there's a good chance, regardless of who comes in, it could be a little bit shaky at the start. So I'm very curious how the team buys in, and Luka especially, because I think if you're going to be at the level they were this series, this playoffs, to where they really have to buy into the culture. I think Carlisle had that culture with all the years he'd been there. So I'm going to be very curious how this team kind of comes together with this new coach and if they fit or not.
Interesting. And I guess my final thought on this was just how I guess this happened last year with the Clippers too, but how we all thought it was, rainbows and butterflies for the Mavericks, but then they lose the series. Porzingis doesn't play well. Players or coaches and front office start leaving, and now all this stuff about Luka being mad at the team. And he did just come out and say he wants to sign the Supermax, which I think he gets like $40 million a year, so kind of makes sense. It's a lot of money, but it's crazy how this all comes out after the fact. And we saw this with the Clippers too, like people not respecting Paul George. And it's really crazy how just one quick thing, a quick loss in a game 7 will just break apart a team so quickly. You wouldn't know if they would have won. Like if they would have won, I feel like most of this would not have come out, and that's crazy to think about.
You know what the shocking thing to me is that, like, I understand Dallas is a really good basketball team and Luka Doncic is a great player. But if you just stack the two teams on paper, to me, getting to 7 games with the Clippers and winning 3 games in LA is a massive win. It tells you how good you are organizationally, especially the fact that they competed in those games. And one of their big adjustments was going zone with 3 bigs to match the Clippers' small lineups. And they had 3 defensive liabilities on the floor and 2 main in Kristaps Porzingis and Boban. And then Luka Doncic isn't the best defender either. So the fact that they competed with that roster, especially given there was a lot of questions at that with their depth, there was a lack of a secondary ball handler. To me, it's a testament to the Mavericks organization, a testament to how close they are and how close Luka is to being great. So to me, I actually think it's more bizarre than anything, because if I was them, I'd be ready to run it back, try and unload Kristaps and pick up, a true second star that complements Luka. And Noel has talked about it in the past, a guy who can be a secondary ball handler. And bang, you're probably one of the 2 or 3 best teams in the West next year.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. But I think that'll wrap up this topic. So basically, Mavericks might have some trouble with the front office. And I know they said they want to get a head or a GM before they get a coach, but we'll see how this all plays out over the offseason. But it does look like Luka is going to come back, so we can stop photoshopping him with Warriors jerseys, with Nets jerseys, with Celtics jerseys. That just needs to end now. I don't think NBA could handle if he was on the Warriors, but yeah. The next item here, or actually, my apologies. Thank you, Antonio, for the 5. We'll continue to keep bringing on the quote-unquote fire with the basketball takes. And then also, you are dedicated, Jamal, but don't text and drive. Got some typos in there. That is cause for concern. But yeah, I guess we can move on now to the other kind of front office star player issue thing that's been going on in the media, and it's Zion's family basically wanting him to leave New Orleans. Now, he's been there for 2 years. He's played 85 games, which is roughly 1 normal season. Haven't made the playoffs. They just fired Stan Van Gundy, their head coach. But what are your guys' thoughts on this? Do you think Zion's family is right and that he should leave, or this is maybe blown out of proportion? What are your thoughts, Noel?
Yeah, so I guess maybe it could be blown out of proportion in the sense that it doesn't seem like there has been much from the side of just Zion himself, a lot of family speaking for him. However, even at the start of the season before this all kind of came up, there were 2 moves that made me very skeptical of the Pelicans organization, and that was the Steven Adams move and the Bledsoe move. I think both those players have been good on teams, but I think both of them got a little too much money than I think I would have paid them, and both of them didn't really bring much to the team. And in terms of both sides of the ball, I didn't really see anything special out of them. I didn't really understand the moves. I do like how the Pelicans have paired someone like Lonzo with Zion. I think they complement each other's games very much. And obviously Brandon Ingram helps Zion relieve the pressure. So there's definitely stuff there. But if I'm Zion, sure, I don't – unless he really loves New Orleans as a city, I don't think it's out of the question to maybe see if there's other possibilities out there. So those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, so I have 2 separate thoughts on this. One is, first, I agree with Noel. I guess I kind of see the Bledsoe move because you were trading Drew Holiday to the Bucks. You were kind of sending him kind of where he wants to go, and you were getting back a player that you thought, could be a solid role player. And Bledsoe is a good defensive player. He's just a very, very poor shooter, which is kind of a problem in the modern NBA. Anybody who's seen the Milwaukee Bucks in the playoffs the last couple of years knows that he's kind of the liability on the court for them offensively. And so, yeah, I kind of get it. But the Steven Adams thing to me was just a little bizarre. I've never been a fan of Steven Adams. I mean, you guys know I'm a big Russell Westbrook fan, and I used to think Steven Adams was the most overrated player in the NBA because, to me, he wasn't a great rim protector. and he wasn't a great offensive player. He's just set strong screens, and he's a powerful rebounder. But those two things to me do not mean that you make 4 years, $70 million. I think that's his contract. And I think the Portland series, right? Everybody talks about Dame time, FaceTiming Paul George, and Paul George saying it was a bad shot. The biggest problem with that series is Portland plays a very predictable style of basketball. They play Mark Jackson's favorite style, which is just high pick and roll with one of their guards at the top of the key. And they expose Steven Adams because he cannot move on the perimeter and guard the pick and roll at the top of the key. So they put Steven Adams in the mixer, to quote a friend of ours. So, Steven Adams, I didn't understand any of those moves. And honestly, I just felt like Steven Adams was another body clogging the paint with Zion. Like, Zion is unbelievable in the paint. He scores every time. So why wouldn't you want to give him more space to operate and score? Now, in regards to whether he should want out of New Orleans, I understand that his family maybe wants to get him to a bigger city so he becomes more marketable, because Zion is probably already one of the 10 most marketable players in the league. Like, I watch plenty of Pelicans games against bad teams just to watch Zion. I'm not going to lie. I was one of those people, and he's really fun to watch. But at the same time, I also feel like it sets a bad precedent at some point if you just leave after 2 years when you're getting drafted by a team. I understand the player's perspective and everything, but I also, part of me looks at it as, the Pelicans have had some missteps. I mean, the third one to me was hiring Stan Van Gundy. He was awful on the Pistons, and hiring him for the Pelicans was just bizarre, especially when I felt that the Pelicans' biggest problem last year was, I thought stylistically, offensively, Alvin Gentry worked because they played so fast, and that fit Lonzo Ball and that fit Zion Williamson. Their problem is that nobody on that team plays defense, and Stan Van Gundy didn't get any of them to play defense still. So not to go off point, but I thought that was another terrible move. But overall, I wish that Zion Williamson would at least re-up with the Pelicans and, be there for 4, 5, 6 years and try and take them to the playoffs, because I still think as presently constructed, even if Brandon Ingram is a little bit of an awkward fit with Zion Williamson, I still think the way Lonzo finished the season, Josh Hart still looks like something to me. Nickeil Alexander-Walker has some potential. Jackson Hayes, not the biggest fan of him, but he, to me, can be better than Steven Adams, and he can jump out of the gym. But when you look at all those pieces that they've accumulated and the assets they have moving forward to make their roster better, I still think they can be a playoff team and everything. So I understand why his family would want him out for marketability reasons, but I hope he stays. I hope he re-ups after his third year and, plays like 5, 6 years in New Orleans at least.
Yeah, I'm kind of somewhere in between with you guys. I understand their roster is really not ideal. Brandon Ingram, great player as your number 2. I think that's completely fine. I like Lonzo too, but I agree with you guys. Some of the surrounding pieces definitely aren't it. And here's my thing though, like, can you as a player come in and in 2 years realistically expect your team to just be constructed perfectly around you? I feel like that's just a big ask. And he didn't even play his first year. I think he played, 30, 40 games, maybe even less. So he's played, I think, around 80 games, and he already wants to leave. I just think it's bad for the NBA if people come in and sign a contract in a small market team specifically and just want to leave. That's the issue that I'm, seeing. Like, Paul George goes to Oklahoma City. They have him and Russ. This could be a good duo. But after 1 year signing a huge contract, he wants out. Dame just signed a contract in Portland, and now there's stuff that he might not be there. Now, we don't know the truth of it. Nothing's happened. But I just think it's really bad for small market teams if, all these star players just after they feel a little discontented with the roster, they want to leave. And I'd say overall, I'm more like pro player because obviously teams have all the control. Like if you're not performing, they trade you or they cut you or they're pretty ruthless. Like anything can happen at any moment. But when players have all the say and they control everything, that's when I see an issue with it, and particularly for the smaller market teams. Imagine the Bucks. They get Giannis Antetokounmpo, one of the best players in their history. He might be the best ever when it's all said and done. But imagine if he left for, say, a New York or a Lakers or a Clippers or the Mavericks, instead of signing an extension. That would just be bad for the NBA overall and just the fact that if a player signs a contract and they say, I want to be here, I love the city, they get bounced or the team maybe isn't constructed good enough for them to win, they just want to leave. That's the problem I see. And I think he hasn't finished his rookie contract yet. I know he's a superstar or will be a superstar, but that's a big ask. I mean, look at what LeBron put up with for almost 10 years. He played the player who was best next to him was the Drunas Ilgauskas, and that is not ideal if you're there for an extended period of time.
Hey, don't sleep on Larry Hughes.
Larry Hughes, Boobie Gibson, Mo Williams, all those guys, awesome players. But I mean, I think this is crossing a line, and I think there is a line. In 2 years with a player on his rookie contract, I don't think you can just say you want out already, or the family should want him out, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that kind of divide that you're bringing up, but I think it is kind of an unfortunate situation that the league's taking a turn for, in the sense where you can stay in a small market team, like look at Dame, look at Giannis, and be the man there, but you run the risk of not having as good of a chance to win a championship. And you look at what players like KD do, and obviously there's hate there, but he does put himself in a championship caliber team year in, year out, and it must probably be tough for players like Zion in their position, where they're either stay in their team and hopefully can build it. Obviously, wherever team you get drafted, hopefully you can make them get a championship. That's obviously ideal. But a lot of times you can't compete with these big market teams like the Nets and like the Lakers nowadays. So it's definitely a tough divide. I also just don't like in this situation how Zion's family kind of spoke on behalf of him. I don't really like when that happens with players.
Yeah.
I do think, though, especially with the changes that have just been made, and the amount, I think the Pelicans still have a good amount of picks. Yes, is that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
a ton of Bucks
they
picks.
they have a ton of picks. They have room to maneuver. I think they have a good enough future to make me think Zion won't leave. But I do think exactly what you were saying, Blake, where it is kind of just annoying having to deal with this divide that is just a reality of the current league.
Yeah, but I agree with both of you, and I wanted to touch on that problem because I'm a small market team fan. I'm a Detroit Pistons fan, and I think the problem with the NBA, and I've ranted on this before, is the media. There's too much pressure on players. Like tomorrow, when KD, what KD achieved in OKC, some of those years, some of the teams that they went really far with, him and Russ, the things that they did, to me, are still the best achievements of Kevin Durant's career. Kevin Durant going to Golden State and winning those titles didn't prove anything. And Kevin Durant doing what he did he's done in Brooklyn, to me, is just, he's Kevin Durant. That's what he's always done. Wow, you give him better teammates, he wins a championship. It's crazy to think about it like that. But that level of critical thinking is never applied. And it's always, he didn't win a ring, so he's not great. And that's why these guys leave. And it's frustrating because to me, when a Michael Jordan uplifts, the Bulls aren't a small market team, but they were an organization that wasn't considered to be the Lakers or Celtics, and he uplifts them for 6 rings. Incredible. I mean, the Cleveland Cavaliers have been a poverty franchise throughout, besides a couple years with Brad Daugherty in the 90s. And LeBron James, still to this day, him winning that title with Cleveland, not just the fact that he beat the 73-9 Warriors, the fact that he won a title with Cleveland, even if it was with Kyrie Irving, who's a very great player, people still regard that as one of the great achievements in NBA history because he won a title with the Cleveland Cavaliers. If Kevin Durant had won a title with the Oklahoma City Thunder, which they were very close his final year, obviously they blew the 3-1 lead. And if you remember the year they did go to the finals with him, Russ, and James Harden, in game 2, LeBron fouled Kevin Durant at the end of that game. They didn't call it. And if they call it, the Thunder go up 2-0 going back to Miami a year after LeBron just choked in 2011, who knows what could have happened in that series. So, and if he had won in OKC, are you kidding me? Isaiah Thomas uplifting the Pistons and the bad boy Pistons being able to win with the Pistons, to me, that's a big deal. Even a guy like Reggie Miller, he's so respected because he kept going to the Eastern Conference Finals at the end of the day with the Indiana Pacers. And so, I personally respect Dame a ton. Portland's a pretty good organization. They had some good teams actually before Dame as well. But the fact that Dame has made them this perennial playoff contender in the Western Conference and they can go as far as the Western Conference Finals, to me, is extremely impressive, regardless of whether he wins a championship. And I certainly think Damian Lillard could win a championship if you gave him better coaching and a better support system. I have no doubt about that. But like to say that because he didn't win it, he's somehow a less player makes no sense to me. And I think James Harden is the best example of this, right? If the Nets win the ring, which I personally think they will win it, James Harden will all of a sudden go from a guy that people regard as a top 30, top 25 player in NBA history to top 20 just because he has a ring. But what did this year in Brooklyn prove? That the 7 years with the Rockets, when he was historically great, when he was having 32 straight 30-point games and winning 20 of those games with Austin Rivers and Kenneth Faried, two guys who they basically got because they were cut and nobody wanted them. They picked up off the waiver wire a couple days before, and James Harden played extended time period of games with those two guys starting and won 20 games. To me, that's way more impressive. And so it just goes back to, I think both of you are exactly right. Like, the problem is the fact that there's too much pressure on these guys when they go to small markets, especially when you're a Zion Williamson, a generational talent, to just turn everything around. And a place like New Orleans has never had a good organization. Chris Paul never was given everything he deserved. Anthony Davis was never given anything he deserved. And now Zion possibly won't get everything he deserves. But at the same time, I think that all of that stems from the way the game is covered. And until that changes, until the NBA media stops being toxic, I can never blame a player for wanting out of the small market, even though as a Pistons fan, I want players to just stay there and see if they can uplift that environment. And even if they can't, I don't think it changes how great they are.
Interesting. And I think you can even see this on TNT. You know, Shaq obviously won, 3 or 4 rings? And Charles Barkley, who MVP, unfortunately ran into the widely considered GOAT and one of the greatest teams ever, those Bulls teams. And Shaq basically always makes fun of him because he doesn't have rings. Now, if Charles Barkley were to team up with, say, someone of that era who was a similar caliber player, I have no doubts in my mind that they would have been able to win. I mean, Charles Barkley was an MVP caliber player again, so he was obviously incredible. So, yeah, I think, the media really just making fun of people that don't have rings or, viewing them as a lesser player is kind of one of the reasons people like Zion or others want him to leave or want someone from a smaller market to leave for that opportunity. But I still just think it's bad for the league overall that this is happening. And what is Adam Silver going to possibly do? Force a player to not be mad at how their roster is constructed? You can't really do anything about it. So I think the media presence plays a huge part in how players' legacies are seen and things about those nature. But any more thoughts, Noel?
Not too much. I think it's just what Vish was saying. I really agree with the media and how much they put emphasis on winning championships and rings. But then it comes down to the fact winning at what cost, where I think I just love players like Giannis or like Dame who just stay with the same organization. I think it's better for the league. And you can't blame, obviously, KD or these guys who make super teams like LeBron, because the media, if they don't do this, the media just going to keep saying they don't have rings. So I can see both ways, but I hope Zion stays in New Orleans. I think it makes the entire league better. And obviously the super teams are a reality we're all facing with the current league, but I just love how much talent is in the league now, and I hope that it keeps up at a level of competitiveness where any team really can win. Where I think this playoff series, obviously the Nets at full strength are kind of the team to beat now, but with their injuries, it kind of has made an atmosphere where it's kind of up for grabs, and that's awesome. This playoffs has been awesome. So those are kind of my final thoughts on the matter.
Definitely. So, yeah, in this long-winded discussion, I guess, Zion out of New Orleans. His family wants him out of New Orleans. Let's just get that clarified. I think it's a little rich at this point in his career, but I guess we can all see why you'd want out of a smaller market that has. I think they have the worst jerseys in the league, and they're just not whatsoever. Their color scheme's terrible. It's horrible. Who likes those colors?
Hey, real quick before we go, because I feel like you touched on this point, and I think it should be reiterated. Excuse me. Is that we don't know if Zion wants out, right? Zion could love New Orleans and all of this thing. It's just some people in his family, and this became news and everything. So it's some people in his family. You reiterated that a few times. I just wanted to mention it once more.
Mm-hmm. And then Pinor asked a good question. I guess this is kind of related to the rings discussion and like why players want outs. I feel like it's a lot different in the NFL. That's just my take. I feel like players, at least for NFL wise, like they usually want out because they want to get paid more. You don't see as many ring chasers in the NFL, like a quality role player. Like I don't know. It's tough to say an example, but say there was a receiver that was solid who just took the bare minimum to go play for like the Patriots in the mid 2000s or I don't know, just like any dynasty you could think of. It doesn't happen, I feel, because it's harder to get money in the NFL and, you know, the contracts aren't guaranteed. So they really are struggling, at least in the NFL. You don't make as much money if you're a quality player in the NFL as you do in the NBA. And that's why I think it doesn't happen as much.
I agree. And I think even when it does happen, the problem is that one player doesn't change anything. The NFL has way too much between injuries, between coaching, between schematical stuff, between the fact that you need like 35 good players, not 22 in an NFL season. And there's so much about depth. I just feel like even if you really stack the team, like tomorrow, if you gave the Chiefs another really great offensive player, let's just say for the sake of argument, DeAndre Hopkins goes to the Chiefs. And now they have Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins, and Travis Kelce, right? Ridiculous. Maybe the greatest trio of receiving options we've ever seen to go with one of the most talented quarterbacks we've ever seen. There's still a good chance they don't win the Super Bowl. It's probably, if you laid down the logical odds, it's more likely that they don't win the Super Bowl than they do. So, like, because of that, I think that stars can't just sign somewhere because the Super Bowl is so not guaranteed in the NFL, you know? Like, who would have thought the 18-0 Patriots would have lost to that Giants team, but they did. But in the NBA, it's like, for the most part, you know, if LeBron, D. Wade, and Chris Bosh team up, yeah, they lost to the Mavericks, but we figured they were going to win at least one or two, and they did win two. So, like, you know, KD, Steph, and Clay, like, everybody was trying to come up with reasons why the Cavs could beat them. But at the end of the day, we all knew that Warriors team was going to win too if they were all healthy, and they did exactly that.
Yeah, I would just say the two things that stick out to me is kind of the blueprint of the NFL, where it is harder for certain players to dominate. Obviously, with the quarterback position, that can happen. But also just in the sense that it's a one-game playoff series where it makes it a playoff format where any team can win, and that's how teams like the 18-0 Patriots have lost. And I think the series format where the NBA plays into the fact that super teams can dominate more, because any team can lose on any given day. But if you play a team like the current Nets at full strength or the Warriors with KD in a 7-game series, it's going to make it very, very difficult to beat them. So I would say the blueprint of the depth chart and then also the playoff format sticks out to me, why this isn't really as much of a problem in the NFL.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, when you think about it, there's a lot less parity in the NBA, in the NHL, in sports where there is multiple games to prove yourself, because the better team's coming out more times than often. And, you know, in the NFL, you'll have those one-off games where a team that's not good in the playoffs somehow beats a team that's better. And I think we've seen that time and time and time again. You know, there's a reason it's any given Sunday. And it's a reason that the Jets team, who hadn't won a game, went and played the Rams and beat them, and the Rams were touted as one of the best teams. And it didn't matter how much more skilled the Rams were. I mean, their roster was far superior in every single imaginable way, yet the New York Jets won. And it's not because it's you know, a few games they played. I mean, it was one game, one Sunday. And that's why I don't think it happens in the NFL. And, you know, one player doesn't have as much sway as one star does in the NBA. Although quarterbacks do have a lot of power, and I guess we've seen that the last few off seasons with quarterbacks moving and stuff, but it's not to the extent of the NBA.
Right, and we still overdo it with quarterbacks, right? Like, we say, why didn't this guy win this Super Bowl? Or why didn't this guy do this thing? Well, yeah, because it takes 30 guys on a football team to win. Like, look at Tom Brady. The Patriots weren't that great of a football team in 2019. Brady didn't magically become a way better quarterback In 2020, you just went to a much, much better roster with a much better supporting cast. So, like, even the quarterback example, I think that's maybe like the NFL media maybe puts too much on the quarterback. Like, you should have won this, you should have won that. But at the end of the day, like, I think there is an understanding that even the quarterback needs a lot of help.
Definitely, but good question, Pinor, as always. And then we can get to the last topic now, which this is breaking today on Friday, 6/18/21. The Boston Celtics traded Kemba Walker first, and then some other pieces for Al Horford was the main guy, and then some other pieces as well. But what are your guys' thoughts on this? You can go from, I guess, Thunder side, Celtic side, or overall. Noel, I'm kicking it to you.
Yeah, so I can definitely understand why they would trade Kemba, in the sense that when I would watch the Celtics, I wasn't nearly as impressed with Kemba game in, game out as I was Brown and Tatum. However, it's a matter of what they got. So they got Horford and they got Moses Brown, who could be bigs, and especially they would give more relief to Robert Williams, who I think is a very talented big on that team. But then the question comes in, and I think someone just says, but who's the point guard going to be? Yeah, Jaeger just asked who the point guard's going to be. That's kind of the question, is who's going to step up to be the facilitator. As someone who watched a couple of Celtics games, a good amount, I would say, the person who stood out to me would be Peyton Pritchard. I was very impressed by his play this season. So I'm going to be curious who kind of stepped up. I think the other guys could be Romeo Langford or Carson Edwards. It's definitely going to be interesting what they do. But I thought the trade makes sense in the fact that Kemba didn't impress me too much there, but did they really get much more in return is my question. So those are my initial thoughts.
Interesting. So I'll touch on it. I thought trading Kemba Walker was great. I don't think they should have signed Kemba Walker for the money they signed him in the first place. I thought their biggest problem with their team at that point was Kyrie Irving and chemistry. And I thought Brown and Tatum were ascending stars, and there was no need to go sign another guy who's going to monopolize the ball in Kemba Walker, who doesn't play great defense and isn't particularly great off the ball. And Kemba Walker, in the last two playoffs, he was really bad against Toronto in the bubble, and he was terrible against the Nets. I think he shot like 32% from the floor and like 18% from three. It was some ugly numbers from Kemba Walker this year. And he's also a guy to me that's starting to get injured a bit more and starting to lose his quick first step, which to me is what separated Kemba Walker in the first place. So I think it's a good move. I thought Big Al actually played okay for the Thunder. I was a little surprised. Now, he didn't play a lot, but when he did play, I thought he played okay. And I think he would be a nice, welcome addition for the Celtics, who still have a thin front court. Though, as you mentioned, Robert Williams is a beast, and he is way better than like I ever knew. Like watching him versus the Nets and stuff, he is an explosive athlete. He could maybe be like a Clint Capella type. But this brings to the third question, and you answered it right, because you answered in-house. You think Peyton Pritchard could be the guy. I think Marcus Smart does a good job running their offense, and I think their offense always ran more efficient when Smart ran it than when Kemba Walker did, because I thought Smart found Brown and Tatum better. But I think the guy they need to sign, and now I think the cap with this is going to be tricky, but I think this is what the doctor ordered for the Boston Celtics. There's a guy that's a free agent, and one of the first Hoops with Noel episodes we did, we talked about how the Boston Celtics should trade for this guy, and to me, that's Kyle Lowry. Kyle Lowry should be, to me, the Boston Celtics are a win-now team. This is an elite duo, wing duo in Brown and Tatum. They need a tough point guard who can distribute. He can make timely shots. You know, the kind of effect that maybe CP3 had on Devin Booker and Mikal Bridges. And I think Tatum and Brown are way better than both of those guys. Maybe Booker's as good as both. But, you know, Bridges is a good player, not at that level. Obviously, Lowry isn't as good as CP3. But I think he was exactly what the doctor ordered for the Boston Celtics. If they can find a way to get Kyle Lowry, they still have Evan Fournier, who's pretty good, in my opinion, a crafty scorer. He would be the ideal sixth man to score off your bench. Marcus Smart is still a good two-way player, though he sometimes takes some questionable three-pointers. But overall, I think that if Boston found a way to get Kyle Lowry, I think their prospects in 2021 and 2021, 2022 could change drastically.
Interesting. So I kind of have same thoughts as you guys. I'll start with the Celtics part of the trade. I think this whole year both of us has been banging on the door for Kemba Walker to be traded because he wasn't it for the Celtics. And it seems clear to me that they don't need this quote unquote elite point guard. They had Isaiah Thomas a few years ago. They traded him. They had Kyrie. They had Kemba Walker. They keep going after these, the next best thing at point guard. I feel like they don't need to do that. I feel like a solid veteran in having Marcus Smart there. I love Marcus Smart. I think he's just great for the team overall. He's just a Boston player, and everyone loves him, and he loves the city and all that. But I think Lowry would be nice. Maybe Lonzo. I don't know. They just need someone who can be kind of like CP3 and be more of a floor general because, like you said, Vish, Brown and Tatum are an amazing duo. I think they're like – if there's like Paul George and Kawhi, they're like just below that. I think they can be kind of like that. They don't need a guy who's a score-first point guard. They just don't. Kemba is not – and that's more of what Kemba is, but that is not what they need. And I think getting Al Horford back is pretty solid. Like, I think he'll be good on the team. He never made sense with the fit in Philly. I guess that didn't really make sense from day one unless they were playing in the mid-2000s, but we are 15 years past that, so that just didn't make sense. And then they freed up around $23 million cap space overall, just a rough estimate. So they have some funds. I want to say, do they have to sign Evan Fournier this offseason? I want to say he might be up. His contract might be up. You might have to check me on that, Vish, but
let me look it up right now because I thought he had one more year.
Okay.
Yeah, Evan Fournier. Yup, you're right. He's an unrestricted free agent.
So I feel like
they'll
probably re-sign him back and then maybe go cheap at point guard. We'll see. Peyton Pritchard might develop and be that guy. Marcus Smart's a dog. I'm cool with him there. But bottom line, I guess that provides a little cap flexibility, and Al Horford will be solid for them. Now let's get over to the Thunder side of the trade because this is what Sam Presti is doing. Is this dude is playing 2K pretty much. He will trade for a player that nobody likes or thinks is washed. He'll trade for Al Horford. He'll trade for Chris Paul, and then they'll play well on the team. They'll get a lot of minutes. They'll look all right, and then he'll flip them for a first or multiple firsts. And I think they're going to do that with Kemba. I wouldn't be surprised if Kemba plays pretty well on the Thunder and eventually gets flipped. I think the next guy that they're going to get is Kristaps Porzingis and do the whole site. Like, this is just a reoccurring cycle. And I think they're going to get Kristaps and do it. I'm dead serious. It'll happen. Just wait. Kristaps will be a Thunder soon. But in all seriousness, the Thunder either need to they need to make moves in the near future. They either need to trade these picks and package them for a star, which they've been trading stars to get all these picks, or they need to sign some free agents, which I think that's going to be harder to do because they are small market, but they have to do something. I don't think you can just roll in and with a bunch of lotto picks and just build a team that way. Now it might work. He did draft 3 MVPs, although granted they were top 5 picks, a couple of them being, very obvious picks like KD. But they have drafted well in the past. They have found guys in the mid to late areas like Serge Ibaka and Reggie Jackson, who were, I want to say, lotto picks are in the 20s that have turned out to have really good careers. So something tells me they're either going to make a big trade or they're going to sign a free agent because they have, I think, 16 picks in the next few years, which is absurd. I mean, it is like one of us playing 2K and just hoarding first-round picks. He needs an intervention. Sam Presti needs an intervention on trading for first-round picks and second-round picks too, because he's hoarding them. It's concerning. I mean, honestly, like what do they plan on doing? Just having like 13 or 14 like people on rookie contracts? I don't think that's feasible. I think it'll be a trade at some point or another.
So I have a guess, and I want to hear your thoughts on the guess. My guess is that he's going to try to hit the jackpot in one of these next 2 drafts. Mm-hmm. And if he hits it, if he picks – because James Harden wasn't an obvious pick, and he nailed that one. Russell Westbrook wasn't an obvious pick. He nailed that one. Kevin Durant, like you mentioned, was, and he nailed that one too. So I think if he manages to nail it, get that guy, whoever it is, whether it's, a Kate Cunningham, Imoni Bates, Chet, one of these guys, whoever's the hyped up guy, whoever he picks him, and that guy looks like his next superstar with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I think at that point he'll start to move future picks because he has nothing to build around at this moment because Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a really, really good player. You don't want to build your entire franchise around Shai Gilgeous-Alexander.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it will be important for him, or it will help a lot more if he can maybe hit this lottery pick or like a sleeper guy sooner rather than later, because he still has. If he can get a roster he's happy with, then he can, instead of hoarding these picks, as Blake's brought up, because he's got so many, he can actually trade them for a free agent. Because if they had a little bit more talent, could be more of a destination for other people to kind of come and join the team. Whereas I think right now, if he has some bad drafts, he's going to be looked at like an idiot. He's going to have all these picks. Didn't do anything. He flipped a couple of players, made a playoff run with CP3. That was cool. But yeah, outside of that, it's going to look pretty stupid. So I hope that Kemba plays pretty well there. I don't think it'll make too much of a difference, but the draft is the X factor for this team. And of course, I think at this point it's probably three people for the GOAT conversation, where it's LBJ, Jordan, and Lou Dort. So a matter of Lou Dort plays up to his potential. I think he's got only potential to go up there. So, but yeah, the draft is the X factor for sure.
Yeah, and I honestly think, like, we joke about this, but what he's doing is really smart. He'll take on a bad contract, a la what was seen as potentially Chris Paul, because he looked to be he kept getting injured in the playoffs for the Rockets, right? Like they wanted to make a move, and they thought Russell Westbrook would be better. They traded Chris Paul and picks to get Westbrook. Clearly, that did not turn out well for them. I mean, their whole franchise is gone when Harden left, but that's beside the point. And then they traded for Al Horford because his contract looked terrible, and it was immovable. So they got first for that, and they just take on these bad contracts, and then just accumulate picks, and then they flip the players that everyone thought was just a net negative, and they get more picks. It's a crazy cycle, and it's kind of genius. But at some point, you need to say, either A, we're going to surround, our team with actual talent and start trying to win, or we're going to, trade all these picks in hopes to, get the next LeBron, get the next Zion. And maybe that's Amoni Bates. Maybe that's Chet. I guess we don't know. And I guess they need to have some, I'm sure he has some plan in place to do this, but you can't just go in with a team with a bunch of lotto picks, because lotto picks are very, very hit or miss. And I'd say NBA, it's miss more than make.
Right.
There is exceptions. There is your Giannis's. There is your Donovan Mitchell. There is your, I want to say Jamal Murray was like the 7th or 8th pick or something like that. But overall, unless you're getting top 5, like a top 5 player, like there is a significant drop off in the NBA for top 3 picks. Like from pick 3 to 6 is a major drop off usually.
Yep. And like you mentioned with, he has to find these guys in the draft. I think that's going to be the key in all of that. And then I just wanted to go back to your Philly point with Al Horford. What do you think they were doing? They were trying to, the Pistons, one of the most progressive organizations in the NBA. Everybody wants to be like the Detroit Pistons. If you remember, back in the mid-2010s, the Detroit Pistons thought that it was genius to put together a roster with Josh Smith, Andre Drummond, and Greg Monroe in the front court. And they also had Rodney Stuckey as one of their guards who couldn't shoot a lick. The Philadelphia 76ers were trying to follow that formula by pairing Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, and Al Horford, thinking that was going to work. So my Pistons are just inspiring the NBA. Like, it's just what they do.
Apparently. I mean, I would say it was more of in hopes to try to stop Giannis and just get as many big dudes out there. But that works one year, and then the next year you play a team that doesn't have Giannis, and they have I want to say Kawhi Leonard or just that type of a team.
They got whipped by Boston without Ben Simmons, but I think you're right on. I think they thought that the East just goes through Giannis, and if we shut down Giannis, we're okay. Well, there's other teams than Milwaukee in the East, and like a Miami comes on strong. A Boston still has Tatum and Brown, so like.
It was a little kind of like they thought, gearing to stop LeBron, which kind of what the East was trying to do for the whole 2010s. But it just turns out that Giannis is quite not clearly as good as LeBron James is, which who would have thought? But that's that conversation. I guess we can stick around for a minute or two if you guys do have questions. There was a couple things I wanted to touch on here. We don't really have like a set schedule. It's usually, when we're available, when Nolan's available type of thing, Jaeger. So we will try to just like follow Vish on Twitter. Vish will post when we're streaming, day, and if available, I'll try to get it on YouTube that we're streaming on a certain day, so that way you guys can know a few hours ahead of time, at least hopefully, when streams are occurring.
Yeah, and just for reference, our next stream will probably be on Monday or Tuesday of next week, or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, early next week, one of those days in the evening. We're hoping to also do it with Grant, so just keep an eye.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you can get Grant Cohn, you do it, because it's always a treat to have him on. But he's a busy man, so he's a busy man. But that'll wrap up this live stream. Make sure to follow, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. And we'll post these individual clips, so in case you missed one or the other and you want to see it, you will have that opportunity without having to scroll through this video. So thank you guys again, and we'll see you early next week.